आज भी भारत में ऐसे विद्वान हैं 95,000 श्लोकास they can recite from their memory and I cannot even recite maybe a phone number.
हिंदू खतरे में है, ये एक पॉलिटिकल नैरेटिव है, ऐसा कुछ भी नहीं है।
The most obvious answer to this is हाँ हम खतरे में हैं।
आपके कल्चर को जब मुगल नहीं खत्म कर पाए, जब अंग्रेज नहीं खत्म कर पाए, सो आपके कल्चर को आज भी कोई नहीं खत्म कर पाएगा। सो देयर इज नो डेंजर। उन सारे लोगों को क्या सजेशन है जो टेंपल जाते तो हैं बट वो सेल्फी और वीडियोस के लिए जाते हैं?
You're not just defiling the experience of others there, but you're actually accruing extraordinary burden on yourself. मत करिए।
इंडियन फेस्टिवल्स को इतना ज़्यादा बदनाम भी किया गया है। आप होली क्यों कर रहे हो? आप कलर लगा रहे हो, आप पानी वेस्ट कर रहे हो, आप दिवाली पे पटाखे जला रहे हो।
फेस्टिवल्स को बदनाम किया गया है because it is a strategic tool by the leftists and Abrahamists. There's no doubt about this. ये एक phenomenon आ गया है कि I love spirituality but I hate rituals.
I'm not religious but I'm spiritual.
Yeah. And I don't like rituals. You think you're smart by saying it, but the same you will celebrate a birthday ritual, will celebrate a Freedom Day ritual. These are all rituals. Universe itself is ritualized.
Any message from your side?
Remember what the Mahabharata said, that every idea carries the seed of its self-destruction in the excess of itself.
द रौनक पॉडकास्ट में वेलकम। नमस्ते, क्या हाल है? राघव कृष्णा नाम है हमारे आज के गेस्ट का। बृहत के फाउंडर एंड सीईओ हैं। ये और इनकी टीम इन बृहत कनेक्ट्स इंडियन कल्चर एंड नॉलेज थ्रू स्टोरी टेलिंग, एजुकेशन एंड डिजाइन। राघव कृष्णा इसे यंगस्टर्स तक, यानी इस पूरे काम को यंगस्टर्स तक पहुंचाने और भारतीय आइडेंटिटी को मजबूत करने का काम लगातार कर रहे हैं। और कल्चर, सिविलाइजेशन, एंशिएंट नॉलेज और विजडम, रिचुअल्स, ये सब हम लोगों के लिए इंपॉर्टेंट क्यों है, इन सब के बारे में आज के पॉडकास्ट में बात होगी। इसलिए ये इंपॉर्टेंट पॉडकास्ट है, इसे अपने हर एक दोस्त से जरूर शेयर करना। वेलकम राघव भाई, स्वागत है आपका।
नमस्ते जी।
नमस्ते, कैसे हैं आप?
मैं ठीक हूँ, आप कैसे हो?
बहुत ही अच्छा हूँ मैं। एक चीज़ जो हमेशा ट्रैवल करती है जब भी कल्चर और सिविलाइजेशन की बात होती है इस कंट्री में, वो ये कि अक्सर ये कहा जाता है कि आपके कल्चर को जब मुगल नहीं ख़त्म कर पाए, जब अंग्रेज़ नहीं ख़त्म कर पाए, वाइप आउट नहीं कर पाए, सो आपके कल्चर को आज भी कोई नहीं खत्म कर पाएगा। सो देयर इज नो डेंजर। सो हिंदू खतरे में है या आपके कल्चर को खतरा है, ये एक पॉलिटिकल नैरेटिव है, ऐसा कुछ भी नहीं है। सो व्हाट्स योर ओपिनियन?
नो, आई थिंक इट्स अ फैंटास्टिक क्वेश्चन। बहुत ही इंपॉर्टेंट सवाल है ये। बट बिफोर वी गेट इनटू द सब्सटेंस ऑफ दिस, एक टेम्परमेंट की भी बात कर लेते हैं, क्योंकि ये जो कॉम्प्लेक्स सब्जेक्ट है। बिकॉज अगर आप दुनिया में आप जाएंगे, एवरी डे यू हैव फीडबैक दैट विल फीड इनटू बोथ दिस ओपिनियंस. There are elements in our culture, in our daily experience, where you can see the danger and it's imminent. And there are things which are eternal, which are flowing, which you feel like, which gives you that other feedback loop. So in public policy and in general complexity and civilizational thinking, the kind of temperament जो हमको cultivate करना पड़ता है, एक बहुत ही अच्छा एक quote है. The hallmark of a first-rate intelligence is to keep opposing ideas together and be able to function.
Okay.
So this is Scott Fitzgerald. And he says this. And I've always thought it was very powerful and very relevant for anybody to develop as a habit of mind in civilizational landscape.
Okay.
Because both these things are simultaneously true. And this is the beauty of Indian logic. Indian logic is not just binary. हमारा जो चतुष्कोटि logic है, both A and B, and neither A nor B है, not just A and B. And this is a question that actually is like that. You need a expansive logic to understand this. Are we in danger? Is Hindu culture in danger? The most obvious answer to this is हाँ हम खतरे में हैं, क्योंकि आप जितना भी कहें, just look at your geography. All of us understand the risks that we've had. We've already been partitioned once. We've also experienced several separatist movements. There is today a weaponization of culture at all levels. Mm-hmm. So the war today is not just a frontier war, conventional war. The war is right inside your family. The war is right inside your mind. So there is an imminent danger, both geographically and psychologically, for the Hindu culture and Hindu civilization. And this is nothing new. This war has been there forever. But certain forces of technology and geopolitics compound it. So we should be aware of it and we should be alert to this. But does it mean that we act in an anxious manner? Does it mean that we self-flagellate? Does it mean that we shrivel up? हम लोग बस इस पे reaction करते जाएं? That is not the temperament to cultivate in this. इसमें ये भी रिकग्नाइज करना होगा कि वॉट दे आर सेइंग दैट देयर इज समथिंग कॉल्ड सनातन कोर, एंड दिस इज़ नॉट जस्ट पीपल हु डोंट बिलीव सिविलाइजेशनल स्टोरी. अगर आप गुरु के पास भी जाएंगे, बहुत सारे धार्मिक संस्थाएं में भी जाएंगे, वो लोग भी ये कहेंगे कि सनातन है एंड देयर इज समथिंग एटर्नल एंड दैट हैज़ टू बी हेल्ड ऑन एंड दैट विल बी हेल्ड ऑन. बोथ दिस थिंग्स आर साइमल्टेनियसली ट्रू, The question is, what is your action? You have to act as if both these things are simultaneously true. And this is the burden for anybody who enters the civilizational discourse. You need to be urgent and passionate in your action, but you need to have the spirit and temperament of a marathon runner. You're not running a 100-meter sprint. Civilization itself is the culmination of all of civilizational sophistication. तो उसको बरकरार रखने के लिए you will have a lot of things that you need to take care. तो हिंदू खतरे में हैं क्योंकि हमारे enemies have compounded. और उनके पास अभी ये अनुसंधान भी है. They have the tools now to break us from within. It's no longer a war at the border. It's no longer a war of just some ideologies. This is a war at a culture level where your own families will separate. Your friends will separate on the basis of opinion. So there is an imminent danger if you understand what being a Hindu means. But if you reduce the Hindu identity to just a territorial identity or to a larger global identity, then you will not feel you're in danger. Only if you care deeply about what it means to be a Hindu. So इसका जड़ में जाने के लिए we should discuss what it means to be a Hindu. Then the question of whether that is in danger or not will crystallize itself.
So what is the right timing या कौन सा सही टाइम होता है एक इंडिविजुअल को ये समझने के लिए कि उसकी आइडेंटिटी क्या है? स्कूल्स, टेक्स्ट बुक्स, पढ़ाई, क्योंकि क्या अगर उस लेवल पे अगर आप उसको वो नहीं बताते, उसको उसके कल्चर से या उसके सिविलाइजेशन से इंट्रोड्यूस नहीं कराते हो या उसके बारे में नहीं बताते हो, तो जैसे ही वो टीनेजर बनता है या जैसे ही वो अडल्ट होता है वो रिलेट नहीं कर पाता. बिल्कुल. सो व्हाट इज़ द राइट टाइमिंग एंड व्हाट इज़ द राइट मेथड टू डू इट?
This is the heart of the problem that we have and the work that we do at bṛhat also. The challenge of culture transfer. So to understand what is the right time, we have to understand how human thinking evolves. What are the institutions that society has created? What are the institutions that your civilization has given you? And how does a person claim and endure with that identity? And this is not just an individual level, this is also the collective and national level. If you take it, if you scale this question up to bṛhat, like any other nation, like any other civilization, we have three fundamental concerns. The question of identity, which is who we are. The question of stability. How do we come together? There is so much of diversity, not just in nature, but also inside a human being, inside our own minds. If we examine ourselves, we are not the same even during a day. Our moods are different, our proclivities are different. So how do you become stable? And then how do you prosper? So identity, stability, and prosperity are the eternal concerns of any nation, any civilization, or an individual.
Right.
So what is the process of this identity formation? And what do we mean by culture? Today, culture has been reduced to food, travel, selfie. हम लोग जो भी अभी culture की बात करते हैं, you like to travel. Like, I'm a foodie. How does foodie become an identity? It's a very transient, it's a very shallow identity. So we've written on this. There is something called a shallow culture. There is something called a deep culture.
Okay.
So there's something called a shallow culture where you equate culture to the externalities. जो हम लोग कपड़े पहन लेते हैं, एक भाषा पहन लेते हैं, मैं अभी ये पहना हूँ या कुछ एक शब्द यूज़ करूँगा, cool, amplitude and all of this. वो एक culture बन गया. We've started thinking that that is the culture. But there is a deep culture. We've written about this. हमारे blogs में भी है. The deeper part of culture is the voice inside your head. आप जो भी काम करते हो, there is an internal sanction because we want to be internally coherent. Whether it is right or wrong is an external validation. That's okay. But we have to morally justify that to ourselves. Unless you are...
On what basis?
That is the basis which is supplied by culture.
Okay.
So this voice which is inside our heads, for example, इसको अगर हम लोग, if you want to understand this, अगर मैं कर्म में believe करता हूँ, so when I have free time, and I have a chance to indulge, I have every reason to indulge. But unless I believe that indulgence has a consequence, उसका एक कर्म मुझे भुगतना पड़ेगा, restraint comes from that understanding. So this understanding that your actions have consequences is an idea supplied by culture, lived by people around you.
Okay.
जब मैं भारत में interact करता हूँ, I know that it is a restrained culture. Because people know that there is a deeper reality than just material consumption.
Correct.
आपको स्वामी जी में दिख जाएगा, आपको मंदिर में दिख जाएगा. Every single moment, you're reminded that you are not just this, there is something else. This becomes the voice inside your head.
Correct.
So the interaction between individual and environment, which is the symphony between this outside and the voice inside my head, is what is culture.
ठीक है.
This is supplied by a core set of ideas. मैं इसको एक कल्चरल लेवल पे एक ब्यूटीफुल एग्जाम्पल दैट हैज हेल्प मी अंडरस्टैंड व्हाट भारत इज हैपेंड अबाउट 8 or 9 months ago. I don't remember the exact date. ओडिशा में संबलपुर में there was a terrible train accident. All of you might remember this. All the people who were on that train, they died. Moment of national mourning, all of us were this one. But like it is the trend, in our times today, we flip, right? You swipe right, and that frame is gone. So that for all of us, we mourned in that moment, and we took part in that, and we forgot about it. 11 days after that, I was just watching TV. There was a 1-minute clip, Raunac. And that 1-minute clip showed a bunch of villagers, जो आसपास के गांव वाले थे. On the 11th day, they came together at the accident site. और उन लोगों ने 11th day का श्राद्ध कर्म किया. This is for people who died, because all of them died. Now I want us to understand what this means. जब मैं deep culture की बात कर रहा हूँ, ये how to understand this by interacting and observing your own society.
Right.
This is not organized by any market. So there is no economic theory into it. There is no incentive. It is not organized by state. State ने उनको जाके बोला नहीं कि आप इधर आके करिए. वो लोग क्यों आए? On the 11th day, they came together to do Shraddh Karm for people who they've never met and they will never meet. Why are they doing it? If we ask this question, then you will understand what is the soul of Bharat. What is the deepest belief inside the voice, in the voice of our minds. They came there because Bharat का एक understanding है सच्चाई, truth का.
Correct.
And the truth is that we are not just a physical body, we are an Atma, and that Atma has a journey. And that journey has to be facilitated by certain rituals. ये इतनी abstract बात है. Death के बाद soul migration, आप हाईएस्ट फिलॉसफी में बुक्स में पढ़ेंगे. लेकिन ये भारत के गांव वाले आके उधर बाय सेल्फ ऑर्गेनाइजिंग दे केम टुगेदर. 11th डे श्राद्ध कर्म होता क्या है? यू हैव टू टॉन्चर योर हेड, यू कैन नॉट ईट टिल इवनिंग, एंड यू हैव टू परफॉर्म some rituals,
correct.
And you're doing this for people that you've never met. So what is the definition of self here? When we look at the modern theory of economics, self is a utility maximizing idea.
Right.
We compute costs and benefits,
right,
and we do this. How do you explain this? So if your understanding of self is limited to cost benefit analysis on anything, then you will only end up with shallow culture.
Shallow culture, right.
You will never be able to understand Bharat. Bharat आपको समझ में ही नहीं आएगा. भारत को अगर समझना है तो you have to understand what is the fundamental belief that is driving people. इसमें कुछ caste है. They're all people from different castes. Did they actually see which caste people died and did it for them? They didn't. They just understood life as it is.
Right.
But they have their own structures. They have their own life. But there is a whole design to this. This is what I call civilizational design.
Right.
जब आप उस बात को परखेंगे, जब उसको आप समझना शुरू करेंगे, then the entire civilizational design opens it up for you.
Right.
So that is what I mean by deep culture. कि food, travel, selfie, ठीक है. I mean, and all of those are beautiful elements. We should do that. But there is a deeper belief system which guides behaviors and how we relate to each other and how we relate to nature.
Right.
वो भूलना नहीं चाहिए. उसको कैसे लाएंगे? उसको ये रिचुअल्स के थ्रू लाएंगे.
Right.
दिस रिचुअल, हमारे जो षोडश संस्कार है, दिस इज टू हेल्प यू एंकर इन ट्रूथ. आपका ट्रूथ क्या है? आप यू आर बॉर्न, देन यू आर यंग, देन यू गेट इन टू मिडिल एज, यू गेट इन टू ओल्ड एज एंड डाई. हम लोग इतना वर्ण, जाति, कास्ट की बात करते हैं. नोबडी टॉक्स अबाउट आश्रमा, विच इज़ योर फंडामेंटल ट्रूथ. द डिज़ाइन ऑफ दिस लाइफ इन इंडियन सिविलाइजेशन वॉज हाउ टू पास थ्रू ऑल ऑफ दिस ग्रेसफुली.
करेक्ट.
आपको क्या टाइम पे क्या करना चाहिए, वो कल्चर है. वो क्यों करना चाहिए? ताकि आपको पुरुषार्थ मिले. तो ये पूरा डिज़ाइन है. पुरुषार्थ
SOP बना हुआ है उसका, सब फॉलो.
ग्रैंड लेवल पे SOP बेस्ड ऑन ट्रूथ, नॉट आइडिया.
राइट.
वेस्ट पे भी एक SOP है, लेकिन उसका क्या है? एवरी टाइम देयर इज अ न्यू नॉलेज ब्रेक, इट डिस्टर्ब्स द प्रीवियस नॉलेज. इट्स नॉट अ सात्यता, इट्स नॉट अ कंटिन्यूटी. भारत में जो क्या है, गंगा प्रवाह इसलिए बोलते हैं.
करेक्ट.
राइट. दैट देयर इज अ फ्लो.
राइट.
वी टेक द ओल्ड, look at the current and create the new. We don't abandon the old. तो ये हमको once we start looking at Bharat like this, all these things reveal. तो culture is taught through samskaras, culture is taught through socialization.
Right.
जब आप और मैं मिलते हैं, मैं नमस्ते बोलता हूँ, this is culture. आपको इसका शायद मेटाफिजिक्स और जो भी इसका डीपर एलिमेंट है पता भी ना हो. ये शिव है, ये शक्ति है, हम दोनों जब साथ में आएंगे तो लाइफ है, आप में भी वही लाइफ है, मुझ में भी यही लाइफ है. All of this you don't need to know. बट लेकिन दिस इज़ अ मार्क ऑफ रिस्पेक्ट एंड आई एम बोइंग डाउन टू यू इज कल्चर एंड दिस इज़ वेरी डीप. तो ये इनग्रेन्ड है एवरीडे लाइफ में. दैट इज़ व्हाट वी कॉल कल्चर. व्हेन आई टॉक अबाउट कल्चर एंड सिविलाइजेशन, it is not the external ornamentation, but it is the values that drive behavior in India, in the Hindu civilization.
बट अनफॉर्चुनेटली इसमें अभी बहुत ज़्यादा लॉजिक और बहुत ज़्यादा क्वेश्चनिंग है. पीपल वांट टू नो अबाउट इट, ये क्यों है. उनको जब तक लॉजिक समझ में नहीं आता है तब तक उनमें एक्सेप्टेंस नहीं आता है. सो आई वांट टू नो टू मच ऑफ क्वेश्चनिंग अबाउट दीज थिंग्स कि हाथ क्यों जोड़ना है, मंदिर में परिक्रमा क्यों लगानी है, आप प्रसाद राइट हैंड से क्यों लेना है, लेफ्ट हैंड से क्यों लेना है. सो इसमें क्वेश्चनिंग भी बहुत होने लगी है. सो आप उस क्वेश्चनिंग को राइट समझते हो या एक लेवल के बाद क्वेश्चन इंपॉर्टेंट नहीं है, एक्सपीरियंस इंपॉर्टेंट है? हाउ डू यू डिफाइन दैट?
Now, this is you captured the meta transition that is happening in Bharat, and इसमें I'd like to get into some historical context also of why it happened.
Sure.
But let's understand this as a phenomenon, right? Bharat is a experiential culture, अनुभूति बेस्ड कल्चर है भारत. राइट. इसीलिए जब आप ने पूछा कि कल्चर कैसे सिखाया जाता है, कल्चर इज टॉट थ्रू रिचुअल्स दैट इज़ कमिंग थ्रू फैमिलीज. हर एक जाति, हर एक वर्ण का उनके रिचुअल्स है, उसके थ्रू एक जो वन ट्रूथ है उसको दर्शाया जाता है. नाउ इफ़ यू लुक एट दिस क्वेश्चन ऑफ हाउ क्वेश्चनिंग हैज़ अ रोल इन दिस, when we are moving from an experiential tradition to an explanatory tradition, there is a cause for this. The cause today is, one, there is a historical ascendancy of what we think is reason and rationality. And uska ek historical context hai, we will talk about it. But it is coming from the education system and cultural system which is dependent on reason as axiom.
Okay.
Without understanding the limitations of human mind. If you want to make reason an axiom, you also need to understand the process of reasoning from a theory of mind.
ठीक है.
In the Western tradition, ये थोड़ा there is a gap, and I'll tell you why I'm saying that. But we must respect where we are. We cannot sit on a pedestal and say that you cannot question. The days of demanding obeisance are gone. We need to reason, we need to explain. But at the same time, and it has to be done with a lot of empathy and grace, and that is why communication and how we communicate is very, very crystal and very important. You need to encourage the questioning, but you also need to show the limitations of that questioning without an internal compass.
Okay.
And there is a beautiful axiom from Mahabharata which is, into my mind, it sums up everything. जैसा महाभारता का typical है वो वैसे ही है.
ठीक है.
It says every single idea in this world, every single idea carries the seed of its self-destruction in the excess of itself.
Okay.
एक बार फिर से रिफ्लेक्ट करते हैं.
Please.
Every single idea carries the seed of its self-destruction in the excess of itself.
Okay.
इसको Greek philosophers also, they ventured, I forget how many, 5 or 7 philosophers, they went on a search for truth, and they met oracles, they had experiences, they had a lot of debates in that tradition, and they came up with a 3-letter phrase. Loosely translated, it means nothing in excess. So questioning is natural, especially when your entire education system and culture is reason-based. It is a very natural outcome. It must be respected and engaged with.
Right.
But at the same time, we must also integrate the importance of silence, reflection, contemplation, and being into that questioning. ये हमको भारतीय ज्ञान परंपरा की पेडागॉजी में बहुत ही डीप लेवल पे मिलता है.
Okay.
अगर आप वेद अध्ययन करेंगे या इफ़ यू लुक एट इंडियन नॉलेज सिस्टम पेडागॉजी, उसमें है श्रवण, सीकिंग, क्वेश्चनिंग, लिसनिंग, रीडिंग, ऑल ऑफ दिस इंटरेक्शन दैट वी आर डूइंग. उसके बाद है मनन. मनन इज कंटेम्पलेशन. आई माइट आस्क 100 क्वेश्चंस, but that doesn't mean that I have actually had an experience or a glimpse of the truth.
Right.
Unless I contemplate on what it means in the recess of my own mind. Then hai nididhyasan. Nididhyasan is being. In Indian tradition, there is no respect for anybody who has knowledge but that cannot translate into behavior.
Right.
Knowledge is behavior.
Right.
जैसा मेरा व्यवहार है वही मेरा ज्ञान है.
Right.
So the more you question, the more demand you are putting on your own behavior. ये समझना चाहिए. Questioning is not a problem. But how much of that question are you able to bring into your being and your behavior?
Right.
And summon the answer that you are given, which you agree with, at a moment of your weakness. सच बोलना. सच के बारे में you can have 100 questions. या maintaining some kind of restraint. इसके बारे में 100 questions you can ask. But the true test of your quest for truth is when you are tempted and whether you are able to summon that knowledge at that time. In that moment, not just when you can afford it, but in that moment of compulsion, do you exercise a choice to be conscious?
Right.
That is the truth testament of knowledge. So we should help young people also understand, or not just young people, all of us. Questioning is not bad. The intent with which you question. Do you question? ये बहुत ही subtle तरीका से एक भगवद गीता में श्लोक है. I cannot say the entire श्लोक, but उसमें एक है प्रश्न और परिप्रश्न. So there is an exposition on why is this word called pari there. प्रश्न तो प्रश्न है.
Correct.
So why is pari there? Pari is you can ask a question either to check the knowledge of the person or to just express yourself, or you can ask a question to genuinely know.
Correct.
Pari is the differentiator of that intent. Am I asking to test you? It might be my guru, my neighbor, my teacher, whoever. Or am I genuinely testing to know?
No.
Which means that I am actually imputing a greater responsibility on myself. मैं खुद पे ज़्यादा responsibility ले रहा हूँ. अगर मैं 100 सवाल पूछूंगा और उसके 100 सवाल के जवाब मिल जाएंगे, मुझे 100 गुना काम करना पड़ेगा to actually internalize it. So the compass is, the measure is responsibility.
Correct. Which is not the case these days.
It is not. Because culture sanctions incessant expression. जब हम लोग ये culture की बात कर रहे हैं, culture is what is sanctioned and what is punished. Or what is discarded or discouraged.
Right.
If only question is encouraged, then there is a compromise in behavior. And you substitute, and Thomas Sowell says this of Western liberal culture, he says, we've exchanged what sounds good for what works. And that is what you see happening, right?
Absolutely.
Ab dekhiye, right? We are actually, we all like some ideas of ourselves. But and there's a beautiful recent example iska ye America election ke lot of material that we got for cultural examination. One of the things was about, I think this was in Australia, not in America, I forget where it was, but udhar hai ki everybody should live together, multiculturalism and all of these things. So somebody, ek aboriginal tribe tha, and they knocked the door, somebody knocked the door and said, you believe in this, you advocated this. To some people who said, yes, everybody should be allowed, we are all one and all of that. They said, yes, absolutely, we should. And all. So suddenly they showed them a host of aborigines who said, they'll now live with you. Immediately, they shut the door.
Correct.
So ye ek hai ki the truth content of what we are saying.
Exactly.
Are we putting ourselves through that reflective fire? Are we asking, are we really authentic in what we are saying?
Correct.
शक्ति जो है, because इस civilization में शब्द ब्रह्मन है, which means word is ब्रह्मन. वो हम में कैसे आएगा? How do you get it? When it is going through the embers of constant reflection for it to be true. इसलिए आप ज्ञानी से, आज तो expressive media communication है, but अगर if you go to a guru, they teach you in silence. Right? The power of that silence is so much.
Correct.
So this gap is also critical.
Absolutely.
So we should blend,
Correct.
We should respect it, engage it, but gently also show the responsibility that comes with questioning in actual behavior.
So अगर question करना है तो do it like Arjuna way.
Yeah.
The way he asked questions to
the intensity
Krishna.
of that.
And he asked thousands of questions.
100.
फिर that questions converts into seeking and not exactly questioning only.
Yes.
तो फिर आप
It's not questioning because I have the opportunity.
Correct.
It's really because I want to know and I'm troubled, right? And a troubled का भी there has to be a reflection.
Right.
And उसमें अगर आप देखेंगे in that exchange between भगवान श्री कृष्ण और अर्जुन जी के, श्री कृष्ण जी addresses him in different ways. कभी जितेंद्र, कभी पार्थ, कभी अर्जुना, कभी कौंतेय. These are all actually deep psychological tools. When he has to evoke a certain kind of identity, he calls him something. When he has to evoke a certain kind of identity, he evokes something else. That whole dialogue is the greatest dialogue of teaching. And Krishna is the greatest teacher, but that is how it was, right? So, उसमें जो exchange हो रहा है, there is a transference of consciousness.
Right.
Education भारत में ज्ञान की प्राप्ति was actually a transference of consciousness. इसलिए इधर की pedagogy is उपनिषद. गुरु के पास बैठ के सीखना. Because it is not just information.
Right.
An abundance of information creates a poverty of attention. Herbert Simon.
Correct.
बोला था बहुत दिन पहले, right? And today we are dealing with that. How do you transfer consciousness when information is free? It's a challenge that we have.
Because you mentioned abundance of information, so social media is a threat जो आपको अपने कल्चर और सिविलाइजेशन से डिस्कनेक्ट रखता है, या we can use social media in a certain way to imbibe that or to execute that.
Any instrument is as good as the consciousness that is driving it, right? And social media is a great instrument, assuming the consciousness that is driving it is dharmic. इसमें थोड़ा अगर if you're okay with it, I want to locate this because it's a larger global civilizational issue. It's not just about Bharat, it's not even a Hindu concern. It's a global civilizational issue. And we should understand what is the meta-phenomenon that's driving this.
Okay.
About how fundamentals of human existence are altered when you introduce a new technology, right? Okay. So I spoke about the voice inside our head, which is the value system, which comes from a certain civilizational world view. अगर मैं मानता हूँ कि मेरा एक ही लाइफ है, तो my pursuit of joy in that limited time is to maximize whatever I consider as joy.
Right.
इसका एक कहानी है वेस्टर्न लिबरल एथिस्ट मेटाफिजिक्स से एक आता है कि you only live once, entire nature is only material, and your joy, the pursuit of life, liberty and happiness in the American Constitution is fundamentally about consuming more to get more out of life, which is extractive.
क्योंकि एक ही लाइफ है, आप एक ही बार जीने वाले,
तो आपका टाइम का रिलेशनशिप इज हाईजैक्ड. साइकोलॉजिकली यू आर ऑलरेडी ट्रैप्ड,
जो कि अभी इंडिया में भी बहुत आ गया है.
बहुत
एंड दे मेक वेरी शॉर्ट रील्स एंड अ कंटेंट, घूमो खाओ पियो मौज करो, एक ही तो जिंदगी है,
वन लाइफ. एंड दिस इज कमिंग टू फैमिलीज, ऑल ऑफ आवर फैमिलीज, एंड कल्चर ट्रांसफर का यही प्रॉब्लम है. नाउ वो एक लेवल का ग्लोबल प्रॉब्लम है विच वॉज ऑलरेडी देयर फ्रॉम अ ग्लोबलाइजेशन पर्सपेक्टिव.
राइट.
Now we also need to understand how human desire, because everything that we do is a function of our desire.
Correct.
Right? इसलिए पुरुषार्थ में अर्थ और काम का इतना सेंट्रल रोल है, bookended by dharma and moksha. Right? काम is central. My creative, aesthetic, sexual desire is fundamental, and how I engage with it is what my lifestyle or my quality of life experience really is. Right? For most part of human history, if you take away the last 30, 40, 70 years, most part of this desire formation process was linked to the geography that I was in. मैं एक गांव में पैदा हुआ, मैं एक शहर में पैदा हुआ. Within the locus of 50 to 100 kilometers, I interact with the environment which gives me my desire.
Right.
रेने जिरार्ड बोल के एक बहुत ही फेमस फिलोसफर है, उनका एक थियरी है मिमेटिक डिज़ायर, कि हम लोग हमारा डिज़ायर, वी डेवलप द डिज़ायर बाय कॉपिंग. एंड यू लुक एट कल्चरल फिल्म, आप तो मीडिया में हो,
करेक्ट,
किसी एक्टर का ड्रेस आप देखते हैं, देन यू विल सी
सही बात है.
So till that frame came into my mind, I did not have the desire.
Right.
But the minute it came, my desire is stoked. Right. Now, once the desire is stoked, it's compulsive.
So
because I don't have
it's
any
an accumulated desire basically.
It is a earned, mimicked desire, accumulated. We are mimicking.
Correct.
वो जैसा है मैं मिमिक कर रहा हूँ. तो इसका जो नेचुरल मिमेटिक प्रोसेस था 50-100 किलोमीटर के रेडियस में था. तो इट वाज सस्टेनेबल बिकॉज वो 50-60 किलोमीटर में वही मटेरियल है जो वो एक क्षेत्र में आ पाएगा.
सही बात है.
वही जूते हैं, वही खाना है, वही पीना, जो भी है. राइट. बट यू हैव ग्लोबलाइज्ड.
करेक्ट.
एंड यू हैव नाउ एक्सपोर्टेड दिस डिजायर टू सोशल मीडिया. Now the power of this, and I come from a game development industry where, and I keep saying this in jest, a lot of what we are doing now, personally what I'm doing, is a penance for what I've done in the past. Game development runs on this. We created the attention economy. आपके attention को commodification, we have done it. As you know, through extraordinary sophistication of technology and design and art. Right? उसमें अभी क्या हुआ, आइस बकेट चैलेंज अगर आपको याद है, नाउ देयर मेनी, बट इफ गो बैक 10-15 years, फॉर योर ऑडियंस मे बी दैट फील्स एंशियंट, बट दिस स्टार्टेड एज अ कल्चरल फिनोमिनन देयर. some in Norway put some ice on their head, put it on Facebook, and everybody started mimicking it, and it became a social conversation, right? So this desire that is getting formed in one area now gets quickly globally exported through social media.
True.
You also attach it through a validation loop. अगर मैं करता हूँ तो मुझे validation मिलता है मेरा ग्रुप का, मेरा जो आइडेंटिटी का एक बिलोंगिंग का एक नीड है, that gets fulfilled psychologically. My motivation is that I want to be cool.
Correct.
In this. So I'm copying my desire relentlessly, and I'm also having the means to express it and get validated.
Right.
Which means actually that I've outsourced what I call freedom to something else. भारत की दर्शन में freedom is freedom from. How much I'm able to manage within myself.
Right.
This freedom का definition जो है, it's freedom to. द फ्रीडम टू का कोई लिमिट नहीं रहता है. सो दिस कॉपिंग एक्ट ऑफ मिमेटिक डिज़ायर एंड वन लाइफ, तो टाइम को हाईजैक किया गया. सो आई वॉन्ट टू एक्सपीरियंस मोर एंड मोर, and relentlessly through social media I'm getting new desires that are put into my mind every single minute.
Correct.
So there is a gap, time limited hai, desires unlimited. So naturally there is an impact on the mind.
Correct.
What we call anxiety, depression is this chasm. You are hearing this word now in the last 15-20 years. I see young people saying I'm bored, I'm anxious, I'm nervous. How can you be? This is such a big world. There is so much to know. Forget anything else. Forget civilization, sacred, and all of that. There is so much to know. Why is this happening? This is happening because human mind cannot deal with this chasm, right? Now, the Western world has added a third dimension to this, which is a structural element that we should recognize. Agar time is hijacked, desires are increased, but अगर मेरे पास वो fulfill करने के लिए means नहीं है, साधन नहीं है, पैसा नहीं है, I will be unhappy, but at least I will reconcile with reality. They've also made it free credit. Right?
Correct.
आपको desire stock करेंगे और आपको credit भी देंगे so that you can consume it right now.
Right.
So आपका time के साथ relationship हो गया, आपका desire के साथ relationship हट गया, आपका material constraints के साथ भी relationship has been obfuscated.
Correct.
Now this is inherently unsustainable. हम जब बात करते हैं, the reason I'm saying this is a global civilizational problem. What is the number one issue today? The number one issue is whether we will survive as a planet because we are not within the ecological limits.
Right.
Environmental problems are there. Environmental problem is basically an exponential desire problem. There is a nation state, all of those things also.
Right.
But at a human culture level, you cannot have a sustainable planet with a freedom to culture.
Right.
You cannot have a sustainable culture with a one life metaphysics culture. ये important है. But the reason why we should understand Hindu thought is so critical because it has the design of Purushartha. Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha. Nothing has been rejected. Artha and Kama have been given a central role. Wealth, but the wealth has been defined in a multidimensional way.
Correct.
आपका बस money नहीं है. आपका your children are your wealth, real wealth. Your health, your ecological balance that you have, all of that is there. Similarly, your aesthetic bliss, आपका creative satisfaction, your sexual satisfaction, all of these things have been given a central role, but dharma has been put first.
Correct.
So that balance is inherent. So ये challenge. That is why the social media thing, we should have a Purushartha design to that. If you have a Purushartha consciousness, then social media is great because it helps you amplify that.
Absolutely.
अगर वो नहीं है, so it's a philosophy of technology, philosophy of design problem, not a social media problem. It's a philosophy of life problem. पुरुषार्थ है तो ग्रेट,
चल जाएगा वो.
right? पुरुषार्थ नहीं है, वन लाइफ ही है, then YOLO will lead to FOMO. And FOMO is mental depression.
Correct.
यही.
Correct. So what are some key aspects of Indian knowledge systems जो world हमसे सीख सकता है, that the world can learn from us?
तो इसका इंडियन नॉलेज सिस्टम्स का एक डेफिनेशन भी दे देते हैं बिकॉज वी आर यूजिंग इट इन अ स्पेसिफिक वे.
राइट.
वैसे तो भारतीय जो हम लोग ज्ञान परंपरा, एक कल्चर, एक वैल्यूज़ की बात कर रहे हैं, वही है इंडियन नॉलेज सिस्टम्स.
राइट.
लिव्ड है, राइट. बट दिस इज़ अ लैंड दैट हैज़ मैनेज द ग्रेट बैलेंस बिटवीन एवरीडे लिविंग एंड हाइएस्ट कोडिफिकेशन ऑफ नॉलेज. जो शास्त्र हम लोग बोलते हैं,
करेक्ट,
दैट इज़ द कंपेंडियम ऑफ बेस्ट प्रैक्टिसेस. दैट्स हाउ वी शुड अंडरस्टैंड. टुडे देयर इज सो मच ऑफ डिस्कोर्स ऑन शास्त्र को, somebody wants to delete it, somebody wants to obfuscate it. That is a very anti-intellectual, anti-curiosity stance.
Correct.
Right? Because this is the accumulated wisdom of your land.
Correct.
Why would you want to do that? Right? And so we need to understand what is the structure of this knowledge. इंडियन नॉलेज सिस्टम जो हम लोग अभी बोल रहे हैं, ये 30 साल से इसका काम चल रहा है एकेडमिया में. लार्जली प्रोफेसर कपिल कपूर जी एंड अदर्स हैव स्टार्टेड दिस. उन्होंने बुक लिखा था, दे एस्टैब्लिश्ड अ पैराडाइम. नाउ with the new education policy and of course with the political cover and the renewed seeking of identity, which is what 2014 really represents, jo Modi ji represents that in many ways on the political level. It is because that churning is there, that yearning is there. Right? So now this has sort of accrued a little bit more prominence and more academic attention also in this. Indian knowledge system is a grand cultural complex or a cultural memeplex of at least 6 traditions of this land,
ठीक है,
which all have a shared view of life, shared practices, and their own distinct ways of approaching truth. Vedic is the core The civilization is linked to Vedas inextricably even today. Even if you reject everything else, आपके life में आपका birth ritual, आपका शादी, everything is actually given by, in most cases, that, right? Similarly, you have Buddhist and Jaina influences, extraordinary religious, meditative techniques, ethical governance structures, all of that knowledge, right? You have the Sikh tradition, which has integrated with the Hindu tradition in extraordinary ways to actually give a new kind of impetus to that. Then you have the folk and tribal knowledge systems,
right?
जो lived है. The another way of classifying this is the city knowledge systems, the village knowledge systems, and the forest knowledge systems. And the great grand civilizational design and genius of Bharat was a fusion of all these things fluently.
Wow.
अगर आप पोएट्री पढ़ेंगे, अगर आप किसी भी साहित्य का देख लेंगे, या इफ़ यू लुक एट इवन साइंसेस, साइंस इज एक्सप्रेस्ड एज पोएट्री, एंड पोएट्री में आपको वो संस्कृत एंड प्राकृतिक एक्सचेंजेस मिलेंगे. सो ये जो क्वेश्चन है भारतीय इंडियन नॉलेज सिस्टम, बेसिकली हाउ डू वी टेक ऑल ऑफ आर इनहेरिटेड विजडम विच हैज़ अ शेयर्ड आइडिया ऑफ धर्म,
राइट?
दैट इज़ इंपॉर्टेंट, क्योंकि वर्ल्ड व्यू किधर लिंक होता है?
करेक्ट.
वर्ल्ड व्यू लिंक होता है धर्म में. ऑल यू गो फ्रॉम नॉर्थ टू साउथ, ईस्ट टू वेस्ट. मैं भाग्यनगर से हूँ, आप मुंबई से है, अभी हम लोग इधर दिल्ली में बैठे हैं, नॉर्थ ईस्ट जाएंगे. कर्म और धर्म, एवरीबडी अंडरस्टैंड्स दिस. दे माइट नॉट रिफ्लेक्ट ऑन इट फिलोसॉफिकली, जरूरत ही नहीं, इट्स नॉट नीडेड, बट वी ऑल अंडरस्टैंड इट्स पार्ट ऑफ आवर लाइफ, एवरीडे लाइफ, राइट? नाउ इमेजिन जस्ट फॉर अ मिनट वंडर what it takes for an idea to travel this kind of distance, influence so many different distinct cultures in so many different languages, regions, castes, and all of that. This wonder is what we call Indian knowledge systems.
Right.
And this wonder has been hidden from us by design. So why were we denied our own heritage and our own knowledge? Why is my child not reading Kalidasa as part of school?
Correct.
This one. It's beautiful, the most aesthetic poetry. All the things that young people are looking for today as aesthetic expression, bliss, the highest sophistication of that has been found in the Indian Kavya Shastra tradition.
Right.
But we are not aware of it. It has been systematically hidden from us because the greatest trick that the left has pulled is to take all the finer aspects of our knowledge production and put it under the label of Brahmanism. And because we've borrowed it and we've said that that is the history that we have, basically you've rejected your own knowledge. And so therefore this is not a political problem. It is a culture problem, it's a knowledge production problem. And that is why it's critical to bring back this in the lexicon of Indian knowledge systems.
You're right.
And this is not just about a knowledge academic battle. It is fundamental at 3 levels today, Raunac. And I want all of us to reflect on this. One is at the individual level. One is at the national level, one is at the global level. Let's start with the global level first, right? Question any discerning young person or even an elderly person should ask.
Right.
On one side, you're promising interstellar civilization. But if you're not able to live together as nations in this planet, what are you going to take to the next planet even if you find life there?
Absolutely.
Are you going to take conflict? Are you going to take the same kind of geopolitics? What is your idea of life itself, whether it is in Mars or planet Earth?
True.
So this question is a global question. The challenge is that our problems are global commons problems. Environment, poverty, immigration, culture, hunger, all of these are problems of global commons. Agriculture. Nature does not care for your passport.
True.
When there is going to be a temperature rise, Bangladesh is going to sink. And what will you do with all that immigration? It's an existential challenge, and I'll come to national challenges. But our order to solve this is nation state.
True.
So इसको एग्जामिन करना चाहिए नेशन स्टेट ही आया कैसा है. Nation state as a structure, and lot of strategic thinkers are now talking about it. Samir Saranji has written about this and spoken about this. Can nation states survive digital societies or digitalization, right? Because our exchange is so fluent.
Correct.
But our boundaries are fixed as a nation state, and our national interest is increasingly dictating how we engage in the global scene. So at a central level, you need a different imagination of how nations come together as well, and how we look at ecology. भारत का अगर आप देखते हैं, भारत का actual administration and actual organization was always as Desha. And this Desha was a cultural entity. It was biodiversity and cultural diversity fused together.
Right.
What is in today sustainable literature, जो advanced Western research है, today they are talking about bioregions. Bioregions is the alternative imagination to how the planet can be structured so that species and geography and lifestyle can be mapped together. This is the idea of Desha. And this comes to us from a beautiful 10th century poem, Rajashekara's Kavyamimamsa. And I'm not a Sanskrit scholar, but I've heard from scholars and I'm tremendously inspired by it. Says, how was this nation, what do we mean by a geocultural entity? हम लोग भूगोल और कल्चर को कैसे, how do we fuse it together?
ठीक है.
He says, the prince of literature married the princess of poetry. The prince of literature married the princess of poetry and together they went on a ride. And as long as they traveled, that became one unit. इसका मतलब क्या है? मतलब है कि the central ideas of life, of beauty, of joy, of death, which are spread through literature, whether it is kavya or other forms of literature, they bought this land and people together. जो ओडिशा की बात कर रहे हैं, the people that they have done the ritual for are not their caste, their language, their religion.
Correct.
But if you look at the entire nation-state organization in Europe, based on the history, it is based on ethnic. France is where French people are.
Right.
Germany is where Germany is spoken. And then you want to create multiculture. You cannot create multiculture without a core truth.
Right.
So that's a political project. It is already failing, right? Now we come to the national level. Why this is important? You have a situation in Bengal. You have a situation in Kerala. You have a situation in Punjab. We've already seen how, like I said, the India-Canada relationship has been affected by politics that are completely captured by one small vote bank. And how nation-state relationships and world order is being threatened by this kind of dissonance.
Correct.
This is a national integrity issue. Today we are being told that Hindu and Sikh traditions are different. They are not. They are actually coming from the same source. It's a specific thing that has emerged as a response to the Islamic threat at that time. And that is the actual culmination of the Hindu spirit of fighting, right? If you don't have that knowledge system that brings this unity, you will have these moments. So that is at the national level why you need to have Indian knowledge systems as a national integrative force. And this is being understood. All the policy thinkers and leaders are also encouraging.
Right.
Lastly, at the individual level, ये जो fracture है meaning का, fulfillment का, joy का, जो हमने already बात किया है, the difference between the desires and the means to handle yourself.
Right.
The definition of freedom. If you don't have a new knowledge system, if you continue to think life is only once and material consumption is the only way, you will have more and more depression. You will have more and more mental health issues. Mental health is not decoupled from environment.
Correct.
You need to have a theory of mind and self. तो ये Indian knowledge system में ये religion, art, culture, lifestyle, politics, administration, sciences, इन सब का ये 6 दर्शन से जो एक knowledge आता है, that is what we call Indian knowledge systems. And it has all the answers for the existential problems, and we'll talk about it. But fundamentally, we need to understand that problems are also linked to knowledge systems. What you consider as true becomes your pursuit, and if that pursuit is not based on some knowledge which is sustainable, you will not create a sustainable world.
स्कूल की बुक्स में जो अभी बच्चों को पढ़ाया जा रहा है, उसमें आप कुछ चेंजेस देख रहे हैं? क्या करंट गवर्नमेंट उसमें कुछ कर रही है? और अगर है तो वो किस लेवल पे है और कितने लेवल तक अभी करेक्शन करना बाकी है?
तो हमने अभी इंडियन नॉलेज सिस्टम का एक स्ट्रक्चर बोला है, तो उसका पॉलिसी इंस्ट्रूमेंटेशन इज थ्रू द न्यू एजुकेशन पॉलिसी.
करेक्ट.
उसका इंस्टीट्यूशनलाइजेशन, देर इज अ डिवीजन विद इन मिनिस्ट्री ऑफ एजुकेशन कॉल्ड द इंडियन नॉलेज सिस्टम सेंटर ऑफ एक्सलेंस. IK सेल है वो एक, राइट. And now the policy says all university education, all education in fact, should have the Indian knowledge embedded into it.
Right.
In fact, there is now a mandate that at least at a UGC level, 5% of curriculum should be Indian knowledge systems.
Only 5%?
Only 5%. It's not an intrepid stance. It is a air cover that is there. And we must also be sober about it because that structure you cannot dismantle it, right? It's not like all existential जो extant knowledge है वो बेकार है, वैसा भी नहीं है. There is science, हम लोग भी उसी में से पढ़ के आए हैं.
Correct.
But there is a civilizational element which is fundamental for your own nation and well-being that is missing. This gap we have to understand.
Correct.
So Indian knowledge system does not mean that you overhaul everything that's there. It's not that.
Right.
But it is that the drishti through which you teach that.
Correct.
It is 5%, of course, वो कम लगता है, लेकिन 5% if it is the foundational vision. साइंस को देखने का तरीका क्या है? How do you understand what is in the realm of observable universe, what is in the realm of unobservable thing? अगर वो समझेंगे आप, then your दृष्टिकोण changes. Similarly, economics. Economics can also be taught with all the systems, but it can be looked at from this perspective.
Correct.
So it's still very, very powerful, although it needs momentum. तो यूनिवर्सिटीज़ में है. The real battle is schools. Because जो आपने भी इससे पहले भी सवाल पूछा है, and I said there's a historical process that we need to understand. We keep saying कि भारत was a rich nation. Everybody likes to quote that survey. We were
सोने की चिड़िया थी.
हाँ, सोने की चिड़िया थी, and for 2/3 of known history, we were the world's leading economic power. We take pride in it, and rightfully so, it's not a problem, but we don't ask the next question. Right? What makes a nation economically powerful? Is it just materials? Is it just technology? Or is there more foundational human potential that is being channeled through a certain institutional design? So we need to ask that question. If Bharat was the leading economic power for such 2-3 millennia, how did that get created? वो create इसलिए हुआ क्योंकि this civilization had designed a way for people, children particularly, to go through a mastery journey very early. That was done through the Varnashrama system. By the age of 11 or 12, Professor Bharat Gupta shows this in his research. The kids in ancient India were extraordinarily productive. Productive not just in an economic sense, it is a wholesome, integral productivity. They were not looking for a job. They were not looking for any other means of identity.
Wow.
They had one craft or one skill, most part of India. इतने मंदिर कैसे बने? इतने ग्रंथ कैसे लिखे गए? Now think about this. Because the debate is so framed in politics, we miss all the beautiful elements. ग्रंथ जब लिखा जाता है, there's let's say Vedic scholar, but उसको लिखा जाता है on a palm leaf. Who is extracting the palm leaf? Does it mean that there is no conversation, there is no link in the society? वर्ण जो हम लोग इतना आजकल का डिबेट है, वर्ण is there in wood, in stone, in leaves, in everything. That is a type. You have to shift your consciousness from all the material properties to types. उसका गुण कर्म है. It has a certain essence and a certain function. Everything in the Indian drishti was looked at it as this.
Right.
What is its potentiality based on guna karma, and how do we align it with something that can be beautiful and productive?
Correct.
That is how you had a great civilization. Now, it is intellectually dishonest to say that we are a great civilization and then say, our history is only of oppression. It's just intellectually dishonest. You have to inquire more. Doesn't mean that the society has not fallen to, lower tendencies. All societies at all points in time do. But do you have the ability to renew on your own? ये भारत में है, right? तो ये जो knowledge systems का है, ये 11-year kid was already integrated into it by practice.
Okay.
शास्त्र बाद में आता है. Shastra is only for this one. That is the compendium, right? But for most functional things, people already had a highly productive, highly creative enterprise. That's how we created. So Gurukul पद्धति जो है was that. Fundamental, अगर इसको और भी basic में लेके जाएं, हमारे पास आप, मैं या कोई भी हो, there are only 3 or 4 fundamental things that we come with. Your attention, your will, your memory, and your ability to put these things towards a purpose.
Correct.
Fundamental human potential, चांदोग्य उपनिषद में जो आता है यही है. This is what it is, right? IKS जो हम लोग बोल रहे हैं स्कूल लेवल पे गुरुकुल पद्धति में, it was about compounding these fundamental things.
Wow.
आज भी भारत में ऐसे विद्वान हैं 95,000 श्लोकास they can recite from their memory. And I cannot even recite maybe a phone number. 95,000 shlokas from memory. The most perfect instrument technology that was ever created is the pedagogy of Indian knowledge systems, where oral transmission from the guru to the sishya, content, consciousness, and technique, all 3 were transferred. And through that, they were able to do extraordinary things. You can destroy all the other things. How did we survive? See, Bharatiya civilization mein I really get hurt by this, that most of the question is, if we were so great, why did we lose? Why did they attack us? That is one way. That's an entitled question. But a more seeking mind, a mind that is capable of gratitude, will ask, how did we survive?
Correct.
when no other civilization survived. ऐसा क्या था हमारे पास जो which managed to hold on? That was the system, which actually made sure that we captured the knowledge in our minds and transmitted it orally.
Correct.
When everything was broken, they took it inside their homes. Pankaj ji, जो मेरे साथी है, he has done a lot of research on this and he speaks beautifully on this, right? How the civilization can renew even from a name, right? Now, Ram का नाम लेके how they can build it.
Correct.
So this is the civilizational genius, the pedagogy of Gurukula.
Correct.
इसको वापस लाना है.
Is there any structure, is there any institution जो भारत में भी ऐसा कर रहा है?
बहुत सारे. And
जहाँ पे लोग अपने बच्चों को भेज रहे हैं?
बहुत सारे हैं, लेकिन बहुत सारे का ज़रूरत है. We need a million times more than what we have, but we have. हमारे इंडियन नॉलेज सिस्टम अभी थोड़ा एक फ्रेटर्निटी बन रहा है. उसी में बहुत सारा अनादि गुरुकुल है, विद्या क्षेत्र बेंगलुरु में जो मुनिधि मान जी चलाते हैं. इट्स ब्यूटिफुल ऑर्गेनाइजेशन. अनादि हैज़ कम अप विद टेक्स्ट बुक्स एंड पेडागोजी ट्रेनिंग फॉर टीचर्स. देयर आर मेनी ब्रह्मवर्चस ऑन हिंदू पेरेंटिंग का एक अलग सा है. देयर आर मेनी पीपल इन दिस इकोसिस्टम हु आर डूइंग दिस फाउंडेशनल वर्क, बट वी नीड टू अंडरस्टैंड द why are we doing this. And now there is also Bharatiya Shikshan Mandal, government, Sangh, they've always also encouraged gurukuls. ऐसा ये नहीं कि वो पूरा ये हो गया. They've been many
गुरुकुल का एक जो परसेप्शन है लोगों के माइंड में कि फिर बच्चा आगे जाके एम्प्लॉयमेंट कैसे पाएगा, वो एक बहुत ही फंडामेंटल और एक बहुत ही सरफेस वाला ऑब्जर्वेशन है, बट है सर्वाइवल भी तो एक इंपॉर्टेंट चीज़ है कि बहुत बच्चा कमाएगा क्या, खाएगा क्या, कहाँ नौकरी कहाँ करेगा.
एंड वी मस्ट रेस्पेक्ट इट. वी मस्ट रेस्पेक्ट दिस ओपिनियन. One, if you understand that your child is becoming high potency, uska attention, will, memory is peaking at a certain level, then whatever he chooses to do, he will be good at it.
Correct.
वो साइंस में जा सकता है, बिजनेस में जा सकता है, इकोनॉमिक्स में जा सकता है. दिस कॉन्सेप्चुअल क्लैरिटी इंपॉर्टेंट है.
और ये कितने साल तक करना है बच्चे को?
तो डिफरेंट गुरुकुल्स, लाइक if you go through the traditional method, there is a 12-year education that you need to do for the Vedic Shastra kind of thing.
First 12 years.
वो वाला, that's one.
टोटल 12 साल होना चाहिए वो.
तो
स्टार्टिंग फ्रॉम 6 to 18.
हाँ, वैसा वाला एक है. देन डिफरेंट. See, in the Indian design, it's never just one thing.
Okay.
वैसा नहीं है. There is a standard method which is for a particular purpose.
ठीक है.
But then there are customizations and modular implementation at every level.
Right.
तो फॉर एग्जाम्पल अनादि का जो अभी गुरुकुल है, इट्स अ ब्यूटिफुल कॉन्सेप्ट दैट आप जिसमें भी आप सक्षम हो.
Okay.
If you are a cook, you start a Gurukul teaching cooking.
Okay.
Because the lesson is not just in the content or the craft, it's the person. How did you achieve mastery? How do you behave? How do you talk? How do you deal with situations in your life? What is your discipline? So the Gurukul becomes a place where integral development happens. ऐसे बहुत सारे हैं. Sri Aurobindo's greatest philosophy in education is available to us. Swami Vivekananda has given a great pedagogy. Chinmaya mission. ऐसे इतना बड़ा, ऐसे जैसा बोल रहे कतरे में है. The second part of that question, कतरा है, लेकिन हमारे पास we also have these instruments that have been there for millennia and we've held on to them.
Right.
The seed of renewal is possible because gurus have held on to that. Right? तो वो है. इसका सिस्टम है 4 to 12 years. It can also be one person Gurukula. Now there is an attempt to streamline this into one kind of scalable, because Gurukul का challenge है कि you will need dedicated people and the general ratio depending on what you're teaching is not like mass production.
Right.
ये mass production का history में इसलिए है क्योंकि ये कुटुंब में होता था पहले. कुटुंब was also, your father was your teacher.
Correct.
Right. You achieved mastery by 11 years because your uncle, आपके चाचा, आपके बड़े पापा, आपके पिताजी वो काम करते थे. उनको आप देख के आप 6 साल से जब भी है आप भी शुरू कर देते थे, and by 11 years you knew the tricks of the trade. The rest of the 40 years of your productive life was implementation. That's how you became master and productive. Because that is not there. Formal education system has replaced that.
Right.
And this has happened because there is a historical development in Europe. Europe में the entire fight was between faith and reason. Right. What we call enlightenment, जिसको हम लोग बोलते हैं. Enlightenment was a fight between science and Christianity.
Right.
Because Christianity demanded obedience, and no rational mind, no human spirit can be put down forever. So they revolted, and in that revolt it was a separation of science and religion completely.
Right.
जो भारत का problem कभी था ही नहीं. Right. Now they established universities and structures, and then industrial revolution meant production was organized in a certain way, and therefore education became a means to supply labor to that production.
Correct.
एंड दिस सिस्टम वी कॉपीड इन आर, इसीलिए नॉलेज भी डिवाइड हो गया, साइंसेस अलग है, आर्ट्स अलग है, ह्यूमैनिटीज अलग है, administrative structure ऐसा है.
Correct.
So you've created university structures where knowledge has been dissembled into this. But does life work like that? अभी हम बात कर रहे हैं, इसमें साइंस भी है, इसमें आर्ट भी है, इसमें ह्यूमैनिटीज़ भी है.
Correct.
मैं समझ रहा हूँ, मैं सुन रहा हूँ, मैं एक कलात्मक वे में वी आर ट्राइंग टू हैव अ कॉन्वर्सेशन. ऑल ऑफ दोज थिंग्स आर टुगेदर, राइट? दिस इज वॉट इंडियन नॉलेज सिस्टम इज, where we don't separate these subjects just like that. We provide a foundation, and from there you look at specifics. So this system has to be bought in, but it cannot be bought in with the structures of departments and disciplines that we have in universities and schools now.
Right.
So while you integrate this, you also need to create the right design where this content can go. So काम both में हो रहा है.
Correct.
गुरुकुल भी आ रहे हैं, लेकिन एक स्कूल स्ट्रक्चर में जो पढ़ाई सब्जेक्ट्स पढ़ाए जा रहे हैं उसको कैसे इंटीग्रेट किया जाए वो भी काम हो रहा है. Alternate experiments like Vidya Kshetra where there is a whole Gurukul which has a different pedagogy,
Right.
वो भी हो रहा है. तो आप कभी मुनीत जी से बात कीजिए, ही विल टॉक सो ब्यूटिफुली अबाउट द एजुकेशन मॉडल दैट ही इज बिल्डिंग, एंड हिज लाइफ टाइम तपस्या इज टू हैव 108 सच गुरुकुल्स ऑल ओवर भारत. ऐसे बहुत सारे लोग हैं. मैं अभी 6 साल से एक क्षेत्र में काम कर रहा हूँ. देयर इज नॉट अ वीक वेयर आई एम नॉट इंस्पायर्ड बाय समबडी हु इज डन एक्स्ट्रॉर्डिनरी वर्क. दैट इज सिविलाइजेशन. ये किधर भी, इट्स नॉट इन मीडिया, इट्स वेयर दे आर मीटिंग किड्स एंड पेरेंट्स एंड डूइंग वर्क.
परफेक्ट. राघव जी, 5 साल या 6 साल के बच्चे का कोई पेरेंट्स अगर ये वीडियो देख रहा है, तो आपका सजेशन क्या है कि उसको खुद को भी, क्योंकि वो खुद भी अभी कल्चर और सिविलाइजेशन से उतना कनेक्टेड नहीं है, तो ये पूछना सही नहीं होगा कि वो अपने बच्चे को कैसे कनेक्ट करे, क्योंकि आपने पेरेंटिंग की भी बात करी कि उनके भी लिए कुछ ऐसे सिस्टम है जहाँ पे वो पेरेंटिंग सीख सकते हैं कि कैसे करना है. सो उनके लिए, और वो अपने 6 साल 5 साल 7 साल 8 साल के बच्चे को कैसे अपने कल्चर और सिविलाइजेशन से कनेक्ट कर सकते हैं, एटलीस्ट टू स्टार्ट विथ, टू बिगिन विथ. सो व्हाट आर द टूल्स, व्हाट आर द मैकेनिज्म, व्हाट आर द कोर्सेज अवेलेबल?
So it's very important because all of us, the first time that we truly transcend ourselves is when we become a parent. Even when you fall in love and you marry and all of that, in most cases psychologically it's the idea of you that you see being reflected in the other person that you fall in love with.
Right.
You feel good.
Correct.
Because somebody else is looking at you like that.
Right.
And of course, there's a bit of, not saying that there's no sacrifice, but the emotion is still self-centered. It is when you become a parent that you first recognize that there is an opportunity to transcend. You do it for something that is, and you are selfless.
Right.
So इसलिए cultures में, all cultures teach respect your parents. No culture says love your kids because that's natural. वो natural है, it's there. Because culture has to reinforce this element of
Correct.
respecting parents through other means. But love your kids is a very natural phenomenon, right? So no parent, we should not sit in judgment of what parents have managed to give to their kids. It's not intentional. Like I said, it's a systemic problem.
Correct.
एजुकेशन सिस्टम में ये कंटेंट नहीं था, कल्चर में ये कॉन्शियसनेस नहीं था, पॉलिटिकल सिस्टम में ये विल नहीं था. तो देयर इज नो वे दैट पेरेंट्स कुड हैव स्वैम अप द टाइड.
सही बात है.
बट वी शुड ऑल्सो नाउ रिकग्नाइज दैट why we are doing this. This problem is not something we are doing this because we are Hindus or because we'd like to have a certain identity alone. There is no reason why we should not feel proud just as Hindus. We should, right? But we should also understand it because it's the fundamental of a good life itself. And that is universal, right? Once you recognize this, and this is the journey that I've seen, I have myself had this journey. Whatever I'm saying is basically a reflection or externalization of what I have experienced and what I'm trying to do to solve that question. Aisa koi, I have no illusion that I'm doing some great work for anybody else. I'm doing this because my own child will be impacted by this, right? So it's an empathetic conversation that we need to have, understanding of where our system is. And at bṛhat, I keep saying this, hamare purpose is do ye. If you are a young person venturing out into the world, we want to provide a few maps to you. We've created certain programs, certain avenues, certain discourses, so that you can have a better terrain understanding.
True.
कि आप कहाँ भी जा रहे हो, you are rooted. You come back to the base like in a baseball game. You have a home that you can come back to. But it's also relevant for adults and for people in middle age or even elderly who are seeking to come back. Because it has been so systematically denied to us, it's a great moment of torment when you realize that you've been sold a lie. And we are all going through this. I meet so many people who are going through this. That समझ में आ गया लेकिन करूँ क्या? And that process, mental process of unlearning, and the actual tools and aids that you can have to help you in that journey.
Correct.
Both of them are very tough. Because it will fundamentally you have to accept that all the things that you built as your identity of your success, you have to question that.
Correct.
You have to question that and say, and this is where most people drop out. Correct. Because that process is not easy. This contemplation is not easy. But for people who accept it, even then the journey to actually start living it is very difficult. And this is where we must be very, very wise. Civilization's first reflection is wisdom.
Right.
It's not intelligence, it's not smartness. Wise means in this context, what are the avenues that we can create that are possible? You don't intimidate them.
Correct.
You don't judge them sitting on a pulpit. You gently hold their hand from whatever starting point they come from, whether it is a young person going out or whether it is a wise person or elderly person wanting to come back to wisdom. That interest might be history. आप जो कर रहे हो, all of this content is so important because it creates the first spark of reflection.
Correct.
Udhar se we have to, gently guide into communities,
right,
into practices, into rituals, into knowledge system, into some kind of
right,
what we call a civilizational aggregate. तो इसमें हम लोग कैसे लाए, right? We do a few things together in this. One of the most successful programs that we run is called bṛhat Anveshi. Pankaj ji चलाते हैं ये, where we take cohorts of 30-40 people to temples. And this temple program, because Pankaj has done such deep research on this, he's visited about 1,500 temples, documented, understands temple both as an artistic and a civilizational institution. We curate everything from art, architecture, aesthetic, religious, socio-economic, education to spiritual and metaphysics. When you get that civilizational institutions darshan, jab wo mil jata hai, I have seen this. We've done about 6 such programs now. We're taking a cohort now to Tripura. Some people said we would want to go again, so we are starting another Tripura thing. There is transformation. The great truth of bṛhat, why we call this Punya Bhumi or why we call this sacred land, is that the rishis have sacralized space and time in this land.
Right.
They've sacralized time with muhurta. Right? What happens? What is the process? Your consciousness becomes more alive in that.
Correct.
And you're more receptive. And that is why it is Shubh. For the best things to happen when the wedding happens, for Mangalya, you need to have the Shubh Muhurta. So that everybody, and if you actually observe the marriage rituals, Hindu marriage rituals, and there's also important culturally, people want destination weddings and simplistic weddings and all of that. But wedding is the most important thing in your life. And if you look at a Hindu wedding, carefully observe, at the Muhurat time, 5 minutes before the Muhurat begins, the Pandit will signal, and there are, at least in South Indian weddings, I'm sure there's a variant of that elsewhere, they do what is called bhajantri. They beat the drums, right? Not what we do for ourselves, but this is a signal to the gods. They say that every single wedding has to be blessed by all the gods in the universe. So humans are demanding that God, you should be here. Devta ko bulate hain, say that, and they say, Sumuhurta kale savadana, which means Muhurta is approaching, savdan. You're cautioning gods. You're telling them, be alert. This is Loka Kalyana happening here. And therefore, you need to all come and bless.
Correct.
And this is the most important thing that they do. So that's how they sacralize time. They've sacralized space with temples, kshetra. You don't need to understand anything else. आप अपने घर में आपका behavior देख लीजिए. You are one way in the hall, one way in this one, but most Indian families across religions and castes also, to be honest, have one sacred space. Chota sa ek mandir. Notice your behavior when you go into that space.
True.
It is the same you. But your speech will be different, your tempo will be different, your entire awareness levels will be different. That is because you are entering a sacred space. The genius of this land and rishis, what they've done is to sacralize the entire land of 2,000 square kilometers by 1,800 square kilometers. So when we take people to this, that is the most transformative experience, right? Secondly, how do you then spark that wonder and take it towards understanding of questions? Because
right.
Questions both sare hain. So we run a program called Ghritam. Ghritam is a conversation that we are having with the parents of 6th to 10th standards in one school.
Right.
On how to answer questions about Hindu identity that your kid will face. And this is super critical today because when the world is polarized and you want to send your kids, because I come from Telugu family, most families have at least one person who is in US, right? You are under preparing them on how to deal with themselves when the identity attacks happen.
Correct.
Hindu identity is being attacked, will be attacked. It does not matter. Maybe with Trump it will be slightly better. But at a culture level, we have to understand that America for the first time is experiencing a moment of envy and jealousy. They always had a inflated sense of themselves. They've achieved great things by propelling themselves into that, that kind of motion. But for the first time, it's a nation that has sunk into jealousy and envy. And that will come out on the most vulnerable people. It's not just that they hate Hindus as it is because of the Christian history, but they will also do it from a psychological perspective to feel good about themselves, right? You need to be able to answer questions on identity. And that has to happen through parenting.
Right.
So we answer these questions. You have 33 crore gods. What religion do you belong to? What does this mean? This is nonsensical. You have a monkey god. You have, you pray to stones. Why do you drink cow urine? All of these are questions. These are attacks. So, and you are not just going to say this is science. You cannot just search for science. You have to search for truth and experience and be able to represent it. This preparation we need to do. Abhi hai nahi hai. We are doing one program, but that is just not even a drop.
So is it an online program or?
It is, no, this one is a physical program in a school.
Okay.
Right. But Hindu
जिसमें
parenting.
ये FBQ, frequent bullying questions.
Correct. we had something more tolerable. We said it's the Hindu ledger of concerns.
Perfect.
or ledger of Hindu concerns.
Wow.
What is the ledger? एक लेजर हम लोग बनाना
सही
चाहिए
बात
कि हाँ कि क्या क्वेश्चंस है हमारे कल्चर के जो भी अटैक्स होते हैं. Answering that does not mean that attack will stop, but at least you will not
Correct.
fall to it. प्रॉब्लम होता क्या है रौनक जी कि एक तो है अटैक एंड बुलिंग, बट टू अवॉइड दैट पीपल सेल्फ सेलेक्ट इनटू परफॉर्मिंग लिबरल रिचुअल्स.
सही बात है.
इसीलिए
Which is a bigger concern.
which is a bigger thing. And same way with how we cannot explain this phenomenon of how Hindus are able to appreciate or completely not look at the hegemony that's there in Islam. Right? Why are you not able to see it critically? You're able to see even the nuances of your religion so critically, like an entitled mind, but you're not able to apply the same critical reasoning to other religions. Why is that? It's because we want to perform to belong.
Right.
Because it's a psychological safety that we've built, that I don't want to be attacked on this, so I'll perform that ritual and be cool. So it's a club entry that we're fighting for. And we cannot be too harsh on it also because we're not given the means. So ये parenting level पे there should be a national council mission when kids are going to other countries on how to represent your identity.
Right.
This should be a policy conversation. So I say there are 5.
ये वीजा देने से पहले करना चाहिए.
करना चाहिए बिल्कुल करना चाहिए. And you should have a set of curated podcasts like what you're doing on essential questions.
Correct.
If you're a Hindu student traveling abroad, you need to know these things, right? And these are the networks that we need to create. But you also need to have a community of practice.
Correct.
आप उसमें जाके जुड़ सके वैसे. तो ये पूरे अभी बढ़ रहे हैं. ये सोशल लेवल पे एक सॉलिडारिटी था. नॉलेज लेवल पे सॉलिडारिटी अभी आया नहीं है. बिकॉज द बैटल इज नॉलेज. द बैटल इज नॉट जस्ट अबाउट मैं एक क्षेत्र से हूँ, एक मैं जुड़ जाऊँगा एक शाखा के साथ. इट्स नॉट जस्ट दैट इज़ क्रिटिकल ऑफ कोर्स, बट यू ऑल्सो नीड टू हैव आंसर्स टू द इंटेलेक्चुअल अटैक्स दैट यू आर गेटिंग. तो ये
सो दिस इज वन कोर्स व्हिच इज करेंटली
घृतम एक कोर्स है. हमारा बृहत द्रष्टा एक प्रोग्राम है थ्रू विच वी डू ऑनलाइन एजुकेशन.
Okay.
Very popular. I'm so happy to say we had recently done a Panchang course with Vedanjanam ji बोल के Twitter में उनका handle. He had just expressed a desire that I want to teach Muhurta and Panchanga. We just operationalized that in 2 weeks. 800 people joined that course.
Wow.
800 people. It means there is a fundamental seeking in Hindus about their own truth.
Wonderful.
मुहूर्त के बारे में, पंचांग के बारे में 20 सेशंस ऐसे कुछ थे on how to look at Rasi, how to look at all of these things. Once you get that knowledge, you understand, you automatically have gratitude.
Right.
कि मेरे ancestors have given this. Then attack on that identity you will naturally respond to.
Correct.
Because it has given you joy.
True.
तो ये द्रष्टा का एक है ऑनलाइन कोर्सेज का. Most of our work though is with universities and schools, which is what we call Indian knowledge systems. All of the things that we do in temples, content, online courses is to generate the curiosity and wonder. एक मोमेंट ऑफ वंडर यू शुड एक्सपीरियंस अबाउट वॉट यू बिलोंग टू, बट दैट विल बी ट्रांजिएंट. वो खत्म हो जाएगा बिकॉज लाइफ विल इंट्रूड. So your education system has to keep supplying this to you.
Correct.
That is the work that we do with universities in developing faculty, strategizing Indian knowledge systems, producing courses. अभी universities के लिए कर रहे हैं. So broadly, this is the work, and this is, I'm not just saying that there are many people who are doing it. Indica does a great job of online courses. They've created a great network of scholars and practitioners. I've benefited from it. So this is now having the at least the structure of an ecosystem. हम लोग ये word use करते हैं लेकिन little understood.
सही बात है.
Ecosystem is living organism. Abhi ye small things. Rekha ji of Hindu parenting. She runs a channel called Hindu parenting. She addresses these concerns on Hindu parenting.
Right.
So we all come together. It's like a community of people who care for these things. Of course, politically aware. But if you're only looking at politics, then you're missing the larger picture of culture and knowledge, which is where we are. I mean, even then, it's very small. So
Correct.
We have to compound the success of this to make sure that it becomes available to every residential welfare society.
True.
In every metro.
फ्री टेम्पल मूवमेंट पे आपका क्या व्यू है?
It needs study. It absolutely has to be done. We've made a proposal for it because it's not a monolithic. It's not just one temple. केरल में टेम्पल का स्ट्रक्चर अलग है, गोवा में अलग है, तमिलनाडु में अलग है, अलग अलग. The goal is absolutely the community should retain. What we are missing and what we propose, Pankaj is actually doing this research, is a case study based approach. Goa में the community has reclaimed temples and he talks about it. Now what do we learn from that practice? What do we learn from the practice where in Kerala where it has Devasum boards? How is HRC impacting in Tamil Nadu? Ramesh has done extraordinary lifelong work on this. What needs to happen now is to build the case study and put the pressure on in a productive way. In policy parlance, there is, three things have to come together. The problem statement, which means that there has to be a recognition it's a public policy problem. Usually it takes 20, 30 years because not all problems are public policy problems. They are at a different level. Next is the solution stream. उसके लिए solutions क्या है? वो solution हमें बढ़ाना चाहिए.
ठीक है.
But we don't need to kill ourselves if you don't have all the solutions right now. You need to exercise that political will, and once the political will exercise, some of the solutions also discover. So it should be a nice symphony where we are building this research and case study, and policymakers and political leaders are actually giving us the mandate to go and do it. एक क्षेत्र में आप experiment करिए. Do it in Karnataka, for example. Right. Where you are, it's or some other state where you have both the governments. You do it, experiment, and let's all analyze the outcomes of this.
Right.
Why should we sit in judgment of all of our anxieties put into it?
सही बात है.
आप इसका experimentation करिए from a knowledge perspective, from a research perspective, and from a live empirical perspective. Destination is, it should always be with the community. How do we go about it, recognizing the multiple nuances on this? I think there's a lot more complex thinking that we need to do. But there is no substitute for political will. All of these things get galvanized once political will decides it needs to happen.
जो पेरेंट्स आपको इस वक्त देख रहे हैं वो अपने बच्चों को ऐसी कौन सी 3 चीज़ें कराएं जिससे उनके बच्चे कल्चर से, सिविलाइजेशन से और अपने धर्म से जुड़ सकते हैं? 3 थिंग्स.
ये एक्चुअल आंसर गुरु से मिलना चाहिए. आई विल नॉट टेक द रोल. मैं
बहुत
एलिमेंट्री जहाँ तक का. वन इज हैव वन Nitya ritual at home. That can be coming together and lighting a lamp and sitting in prayer. One thing. It's very, very important for the child and making it a habit formation जो बोलते हैं. Second is some kind of shloka recitation. Don't worry about meaning and all of that also at this time. If the children are too young, make it a habit for them to know shlokas, for them to know, because it is an oral tradition. It only comes alive through that. And the third is one performing art. There is no entry into the Indian worldview, in my opinion, like the art form for today. Because the art form already gives you creative bliss. And the child will naturally be interested in it.
So music or dance?
Music, dance, 64 colors. Such diversity in this land, right? Whatever form that you choose, because all of them are tied to the sacred. So make sure that there is one sacred ritual which is experiencing the sacred. भगवान जी के साथ एक connection every day at an appointed time.
कोई भी भगवान जी.
कोई भी भगवान जी. कोई भी भगवान जी, right? इष्ट देवता का तो है ही, आपका कुल देवता, आपका इष्ट देवता जो भी है. Make sure that there is some kind of chanting.
Chanting.
That's
so chanting में आप क्या recommend करते हो? गायत्री मंत्र करना चाहिए या हनुमान चालीसा भी वो पढ़ सकता है, या कोई और
बेस्ट जो ये पेडागोजी ऑलरेडी है गुरुकुल्स में, बेस्ट इज दे स्टार्ट विथ गीता का श्लोक, राइट, बिकॉज इट एड्रेसेस ऑल डायमेंशंस. लाइक आई सेड, गुरु शुड टॉक अबाउट इट. जो मैं सक्सेसफुल देखा हूँ, गीता का श्लोक है, that recital automatically creates that consciousness for higher things, right?
तो पेरेंट्स और बच्चे साथ में मिलके
एक श्लोक का there are people who are doing this. Online भी available है. There are people who are doing this. In fact, my own team members, they've started a beautiful small venture called the Vedic Pond. उसमें they get like a bedtime storytelling. इतिहास पुराण से every day between 8 to 9, Namrata and Sri Hari, they arrange a program where इतिहास पुराण से एक story बताएंगे. Kids from all over the world, like a cohort, they come and they listen, 30-40 kids का. ऐसा एक कहानी, because culture transfer was always from grandparents to grandkids.
Correct.
वो नहीं है अभी. Because of the economic system, urbanization, whatever idea of modernity is, it's coming at the expense of culture transfer. This is the Hindu problem. How do we transfer culture? So we need to create these parallel institutions. जो इतिहास पुराण, art, all of these things can be brought into our life together. तो एक है chanting, one sacred ritual, one chanting, which is for your developing your own this one. Right. Third is art, which is your aesthetic. Okay. So the way to look at this is, you need to enter a sacred space. You need to refine your interiority, and you also need to have a creative expression for that.
Correct.
That is the design.
आपका उन सारे लोगों को क्या सजेशन है जो टेम्पल जाते तो हैं, बट वो सेल्फी और वीडियोस के लिए जाते हैं, वो टेम्पल के बाहर ही हैं, कभी कभी वो अंदर भी एंटर करते हैं, वीडियोस बना रहे हैं, पीछे से कोई कोई म्यूजिक चल रहा है, और फिर वो हाथ जोड़ते हैं, हाथ ऊपर करते हैं, बट दे आर नॉट इन्वॉल्व विद द प्रोसेस व्हाट इज हैपनिंग और द रिचुअल्स व्हाट इज हैपनिंग इनसाइड द टेम्पल. सो ऐसे लोगों को आपका क्या सजेशन है कि भाई अगर मंदिर जा रहे हो और फोटो और सेल्फी तो ले ही रहे हो, पर आपको ये चीज़ें भी करनी इंपॉर्टेंट है इफ़ यू आर गोइंग इनसाइड द टेम्पल और एटलीस्ट मंदिर के प्रांगण में.
इसको फिर से वही है आपका जो द वॉइस इनसाइड योर हेड. If you don't understand karma, punarjanma and the purpose of your life, every instrument becomes vikruti. If you understand why जो sacred space और sacred time का जो मैंने अभी बोला कि वो, if you understand it, then automatically your behavior will change.
Right.
But if you haven't understood that, एक basic एक आप नियम बना लीजिए कि whatever you want to do with your self-expression, civilization does not condemn self-expression, right?
Correct.
But sacred space का उसका महत्व रहता है. You're not just defiling the experience of others there, but you're actually accruing extraordinary burden on yourself, because you go there to get freedom from, and you're indulging in freedom too, and you're also applying your idea of reason to justify that. This is a burden that you are accruing. मत करिए. Have some process to it outside once you have the darshan, but once you are there, and it's not just in temples, I'm saying even in weddings I see.
Correct.
Weddings mein today Purohit ji has to literally beg कि give me this 10-15 minutes of undivided attention कि मैं मुहूर्त का I can respect. This is, then you wonder why divorces happen, then you wonder why people are, you're not understanding the Hindu civilization at all. You're not understanding the power of muhurta. You're not understanding the blessings of gods. उसके बिना you will have problems in your marriages. तो ये it is about understanding how it impacts me.
Right.
It's not about rebelling. कि अगर आप ये कार्मिक बर्डन उठा रहे हो तो उसका उसका impact भी रहेगा. तो responsible, and one solution, it's easy to condemn, but right, it is important to also solve. We are creating a 3-day workshop for content creators on the Hindu culture.
Okay.
Anybody. I'm talking to ministry now to see if we can do it as part of IKS division. But even otherwise, we will offer it directly. Like, we'll take people to temple, 50 to 100 curators, and I'd be glad if we can partner on that. Definitely. 50 to 100 content creators in a temple for 2 days, where we talk to them about both. One, on how Hindu culture has to be represented.
Right.
हमारे पास कभी ये मीडिया स्टडीज़ करिकुलम था ही नहीं. हम लोग फ्लेम यूनिवर्सिटी, all the good things that have started also, MICA, all of those good institutions that have also started, we don't have this media studies curriculum from a Hindu perspective. Right. So, and that's why we struggle to tell our story. Correct. You have an Al Jazeera that is telling such a beautiful story of what is essentially an oppressive regime, but you don't have the moral arc of Hindu civilization being communicated. Others have talked about this. तो इसमें we have to create experiences for content makers कि आप हिंदू कल्चर को समझिए, आप एस्थेटिक्स को समझिए, and production finesse. So we need all these three.
True.
You need craft, but you also need philosophy.
Right.
So this program we are starting, which we want to roll out next year, in 4 temples across bṛhat, north, east, south, west, where 100 content creators, we want to run them through this workshop and then build a community that can share. And we need to create a feedback loop that when somebody does it, that gets amplified.
Right.
If you don't amplify that, then you don't have a right to complain of, whatever is getting amplified.
Right.
So those things we need to create.
एक क्वेश्चन मैं फेस्टिवल्स पे भी पूछूंगा. इंडियन फेस्टिवल्स को इतना ज़्यादा बदनाम भी किया गया है, उसको हमेशा इकोलॉजी से, एनवायरनमेंट से जोड़ के हमेशा उसको छोटा दिखाया गया है, और जो यंग जनरेशन है उसको ये बोला गया है कि आप ये क्यों कर रहे हो, आप होली क्यों कर रहे हो, आप कलर लगा रहे हो, आप पानी वेस्ट कर रहे हो, आप दिवाली पे पटाखे जला रहे हो. इनफैक्ट मेरे कुछ दोस्तों हैं वो कह रहे हैं कि दिया और अगरबत्ती भी नहीं जलाना चाहिए क्योंकि PM 2.5 में वो कंट्रीब्यूट करता है, तो आपके हेल्थ पे आता है. फिर करवा चौथ पे आप देखते हो कि एक बड़े ज्वेलरी ब्रांड का ऐड आता है और उसमें वो जो मैडम होती हैं वो गहने तो पहनी होती हैं बट उन्होंने ना सिंदूर लगाई है ना बिंदी लगाई है, फिर नीचे हैप्पी करवा चौथ लिखा जाता है. सो हाउ डू यू सी दिस? ये एक स्ट्रैटेजी है या ये दे आर सो अनकॉन्शियस, दे आर नॉट एट ऑल अवेयर अबाउट दिस कि यार ये हो क्या रहा है? सो फेस्टिवल्स और उनका इम्पैक्ट हमारे कल्चर पे, इंडिविजुअल पे, फैमिलीज पे, किड्स पे, नेक्स्ट जनरेशन पे कैसा होता है?
See, this again is a knowledge system problem, and at a public movement level, Shefali ji ne, she has done brilliant work to highlight Fab India का जो ऐसे portrayal है. There is awareness of it at a cultural discourse level, but the deeper elements of subterfuge, unless you have a playbook of creative development yourself, you will not be able to solve this. Right? Festivals को बदनाम किया गया है because it is a strategic tool by the leftists and Abrahamists. There's no doubt about this, right? And they control the entire media studies curriculum. They control the ad agencies. They control the awards that they get. So it's a nice spoils system that has been created.
Right.
They're doing it also because that's what gives them the entry to go to whatever ad festivals that are there, right? So it's a systemic problem, not just an individual awareness problem. This, and there's a very famous and powerful work on this, and we are creating some. Next year, we are starting something called a culture consulting practice.
Okay.
How do we help brands recognize that making things the Hindu way is actually profitable?
Absolutely.
You don't need to do this because it affects your business. So first level, we need to address the producer side of it. To say that your ad agencies are fleecing you. They're taking your money and giving you wrong advice because it's a nation that is seeking its identity today.
Correct.
And that is a Hindu identity. And if you're going to go against the grain, you will actually have an impact. So Douglas Holt talks about how brands resolve identity myths. Great brands, Apple ले लीजिए, Harley Davidson ले लीजिए, all of this, they create an identity myth and resolve the tension. That's why the experience outlasts the product interaction, right? This is what needs to happen at a product design level for actual creative revolt, right? But at an individual family level, once again, like I said, you need to understand sacred. इसके लिए हम लोग एक काम करते हैं. Every festival, as much as possible, we release two things. One is the beauty, the tradition, and the practice part of it, so that people understand it at an aesthetic level.
Right.
आज का दुनिया, and it's true, is that I will understand it if I like it.
Correct.
I will not understand it and then decide to like or dislike. I will first like. That's the nature,
True.
right? So we have to address that. That needs to, all of us need to do that. Second level pay, we also do on every festival. For example, recently there was an unfortunate incident. I think Sudha Murthy or somebody had mentioned something about a festival and this one. So we had done a video with a Shastra scholar, Srinivas ji जो हैं हमारे Shastra advisor है, and we had done a half-an-hour video on how this ritual is to be performed. And the minute you understand that, you see so much of depth, so much of care, so much of attention to detail.
Correct.
And life has meaning only when it is ritualized. ये एक phenomenon आ गया है कि I love spirituality but I hate rituals. When you
I'm not religious but I'm spiritual.
Yeah. And I don't like rituals. ये ritual में and you think you're smart by saying it, but the same you will celebrate a birthday ritual, will celebrate a freedom day ritual, will celebrate a friendship day ritual. These are all rituals. Universe itself is ritualized. You and I are part of that universe.
Correct.
Without rituals, we cannot exist. There is a whole theory now in the West which is coming on how the society has broken down because they don't have rituals.
Wow.
And if you look at our festivals, आप क्यों ecology की बात कर रहे हैं आप? When you do Ganesh Chaturthi की पूजा in, I'm sure it's there in all traditions, but I know the way it is done in Telugu families in you have to go to 5 different spaces to collect 5 different kinds of wood, to collect different kinds of fruits, to collect different kinds of leaves, to collect different kinds of things that come only at the time, mud that comes at that time. What is it doing? It is establishing your connect with nature along with the sense of time. A time pe ye aa raha hai. And that is being sacralized. That is being put as archana for Bhagwan.
Right.
Which means that it is establishing a sacred connection to you. The seminal insight, and which I got, which turned my perspective on Indian knowledge systems, is nature needs diversity to create life. Nature is forever experimenting and creating new. Prakriti is relentlessly creating by experimenting.
Right.
So diversity is nature's way of creating the new, right? But that diversity is protected. The biodiversity is protected only when you have cultural diversity. When you have a Bishnoi saving one plant, when you have some other community saving one tree. In fact, most tribal communities in India, I heard, and I was just mind blown. They have, if there are 700 families, each family has one tree, one animal,
right,
and one kind of seed or something that they should protect. They can consume everything else, but they will protect this.
Right.
Which means that across all the families, 700 different kinds of plants, animals, and seeds are protected. This is dharma.
Wow.
This is dharma. Dharma is diversity with sustainability. Unless you understand this, you will not be able to. So ये जो ritual,
And you don't need to teach it. It's
you don't need to teach. It's inherent.
Wow.
आप उसका ये ले रहे हो. You are taking ownership of that. So this is how the ancestors embedded this into our culture, into our daily life. And by doing that, you are creating a sacred bond between the tree and you. It is only in the Hindu festival that you see this.
Right.
So this, I'll tell you one statistic which is revealing. So there was an experiment or a research done on the sustainability problem. If you scale up the lifestyle of one nation across all countries, because that is the promise of liberalization and globalization, कि हम लोग पूरे desires and products import और export करेंगे. If you scale up the American lifestyle, you will need 5 planet Earths. एक में बसेंगे नहीं. If you scale up UAE lifestyle, you need 6. China is 2.4. Bharat is the only country in the entire world, big country which matters, whose lifestyle, if it is scaled to the entire planet, we can still remain in one planet. And as of today, there's only one known planet. Doesn't matter what Musk is telling you, right? Why is that? You can argue that our energy consumption has not gone up. We are not a rich country. We are a middle income. All of that is true. But there is something inherent in this culture which balances consumption with actually also letting go.
Correct.
That is the ashrama design. That is the purushartha design. Jahan purushartha hai, you cannot have a challenge with ecology. That is why this is a global universal solution. Hindu expansionism is needed for planetary futures. This conviction has to come in people.
Thank you very much, Raghav.
Thank you so much for having me. It's wonderful.
यहाँ पर आए बहुत सारी बातें हुई हैं. इनफैक्ट वही मैं कह रहा हूँ, खाली मेरे सीखने के लिए नहीं है. इनफैक्ट आप लोग भी जो लोग देख रहे हैं पॉडकास्ट, प्लीज़ अपने फ्रेंड से, फैमिली से, सबसे शेयर करिएगा और सबटाइटल्स भी ऑन करिएगा. उसमें अगर आपको दूसरे लैंग्वेज में सुनना है तो वो भी आप सुन सकते हैं. जाने से पहले क्या मैसेज है हमारे यूथ यंग ऑडियंस को? एनी मैसेज फ्रॉम योर साइड?
Yeah, the world offers you many stories. Right? It offers you a story of a victimhood. It offers you a story of interstellar civilizational travel. It offers you a story of one life. It offers you a story of unmitigated creative bliss. Remember what the Mahabharata said, that every idea carries the seed of its self-destruction in the excess of itself. How do we regulate ourselves, which is the fundamental element of dharma? To be in tune with nature, to be in tune with society. Understanding this is the path to happiness. And happiness is not a function of rights. Happiness and joy is a function of doing your duties. And doing your duties, which is dharma is duty, does not mean that it's oppressive. My ability to fulfill my duty gives you your right. And your ability to fulfill your duty gives me my right. This is the grand design of interdependence that Hindu civilization shows. The minute we understand this, everything else is subsidiary. And figure out your own connection to sacred. Without a connection to sacred, it's very difficult to make sense.
थैंक यू वेरी मच राघव कृष्णा जी हमारे साथ इस पॉडकास्ट में आने के लिए। कैसा लगा एपिसोड कमेंट जरूर करना, इसे अपने हर एक दोस्त से शेयर करना, क्योंकि सीखने और समझने लायक बहुत सारी बातें इसमें, क्योंकि बहुत सारी बातें इस पॉडकास्ट में ऐसी हुई हैं कि उसको सुनकर अगर आप समझ जाते हैं तो आपकी एक अलग यात्रा शुरू हो सकती है, आपकी एक अलग जर्नी शुरू हो सकती है। इसलिए इसे ज़रूर शेयर करना, चैनल को भी सब्सक्राइब करना। जल्दी मिलते हैं टीआरपी पर एक और अमेजिंग एपिसोड के साथ और एक और शानदार गेस्ट के साथ। थैंक यू फॉर वॉचिंग और एक बार जय हिंद, जय भारत।